few questions for you.
Okay.
Hello, I am Lola and welcome to the Between Two BAS series. I'm a first year BAS student doing social anthropology and quantitative methods, and through the BAS programme I was fortunate enough to come across the work of Professor Sebastien Bachelet, who I'm joined by. Sebastien is a lecturer in social anthropology here at the University of Manchester, and I hope this discussion will give listeners the opportunity to learn more about his work and what social anthropology means to him. So, tell me more about yourself, Sebastien. What brought you into the field of anthropology?
First of all, nice meeting you. I just specify that I'm just a doctor, Sebastien Bachelet, not a professor yet. Hopefully soon. Not right now. But to answer your first question about what brought me to the discipline of social anthropology, right? I came across social anthropology when I was a high school student back in France. I'm French, you can probably tell from my accent or my name. But I came across anthropology when I was in high school. I read some Levi-Strauss as part of philosophy classes, and I got quite excited about anthropology then. I come from northern France, a small town, a small kind of post-industrial small town. Come from a working class background, and I came from a place that's pretty small, where not much was happening, where nothing was happening, where nothing's happening right now either, I think. And anthropology was a kind of window on how the world is very diverse, is full of different ways of being, of conceiving the world, of relating to other people, which I found really exciting as a kind of 17-year-old, 18-year-old growing up in northern France. And that's what interested me about that's what sparked my interest in anthropology. And then when it was time to decide what to do after high school and finishing school and going to uni, I kind of decided to move to the UK, and I came to Glasgow Uni, where I could do a degree in philosophy and anthropology. And I ended up actually dropping philosophy because I got a lot more excited about anthropology. And that's it. And then my interest in anthropology just grew as as I got to learn a bit more about how anthropology and anthropological ways of exploring the world can provide so much insights in different topics, not just so much about distant kind of exotic places, but also in kind of helping me to rethink other things that were closer to home, including where I came from and stuff happening there. And that's how my interest in anthropology grew. Um, Probably first I think a lot of people are attracted to anthropology from that kind of angle, from the kind of exotic kind of window on the world. I think it's quite typical of many anthropology students, and that was definitely the case for me, as a way in kind of exploring how the world is made up of a diversity of people, a diversity of ways of being. That's what attracted me first to anthropology. I'm still here in anthropology.
Yes, that's very interesting. I know, well, from what I've read of your work last semester, um, the research that you did centering around migrants in Morocco, I thought that's very interesting and very current in contemporary times about migration. So, um, is that what piqued your interest in that perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I moved to the UK, and then I was supposed to stay only for 1 year in Glasgow and then return, and then I never came back. I was that was 2005. That was a while ago. Never went back to France. Just stayed for the studies. And as I went through the degree, started kind of getting interested in issues around migration because I was a migrant myself. Although the kind of other sort of labels that you see around as like kind of expat as opposed to migrant, and the way that migrants were portrayed in the media, especially in the UK, but also in France, I I just kind of started becoming interested in how anthropology can provide tools to make sense of people's mobilities, but also how some people are not able to travel in the same ways, how the ability to move is not equally distributed. So as I was studying in Glasgow, I started doing a lot of volunteering with kind of small organizations providing support to either immigration detainees or asylum seekers in Glasgow. Did a lot of volunteering work, And then when I finished my degree, stayed on for another year in Glasgow to do some more work with NGOs and more volunteering. And then that sparked a kind of my interest into applying for a PhD and then wanting to explore this a bit further. So then I came up with a proposal for a project exploring illegal migration. That's what I was interested in at the time and still am right now. And then that's how the kind of project on Morocco started. I ended up going to Morocco for like 18 months or something to do work with mostly Western Central African migrants, deemed illegal migrants, people who were undocumented, who were crossing borders illegally, most of them trying to get somehow to Europe, to Spain, to France, to Germany, and then getting stuck in Morocco as a result of kind of tight, hostile border controls, kind of collaborations between Spain, Morocco, between the European authorities, Moroccan authorities, and how these people were getting stuck there. So I was interested in how we could explore anthropologically their lives, how they made sense of their own kind of trapped mobilities, how they could retain some kind of agency amidst violence and suffering, how the kind of images that we see on newspapers or in the media still today about illegal migration are just don't get to, they don't go below the surface. I wanted to go beyond what's taken for granted about illegal migration to look at how people imagine themselves, how they organize themselves, how they relate to one another, how they kind of overcome obstacles, and how they kind of self-identified and organize politically. This is also something I was really interested in. So I ended up doing that project then, finished in 2016, finished the PhD writing about how irregular, illegal migrants in Morocco identified as adventurers. I guess that's what you would have read from the engaging with social research last semester. So how they understand themselves, how they relate to one another, organize to move forward, to find what they call their lives, to realize themselves, to realize their hopes and how they imagine their futures despite harsh kind of deterring measures against migrants. That was the topic of the interest that was sparked from, first of all, my interest in migration, in anthropology, and how there's different ways of exploring the world, and then throughout my degree as well, becoming aware that anthropology has a lot of things to say about political issues, about distant places, but also about places which are closer to home. At the time, Glasgow was my home, and also how these places are entangled together. And so then meeting asylum seekers, refugees, migrants in Glasgow who had done these journeys, who had crossed the whole of Western, Northern Africa, gone on boats, crossed Europe, gone through Calais, crossed the UK, and ended up in Glasgow, was just really interesting, and in the way that it opened my eyes to all sort of issues which are not necessarily explained really well or analyzed very well in kind of public discourses, and also realized through the teaching at Glasgow Uni at the time how anthropology could be relevant to that, how it could contribute to debates, how it could make a difference as well, hopefully, to what was happening. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, that's very interesting again. I noticed you mentioned about kind of it must be very difficult to kind of immerse yourself within the communities that, in terms of migration, you mentioned violence and the different impacts or issues that the migrants had to experience themselves. So what do you think in your own research and your own experience was the most challenging aspect of that research?
Uh, there were many things which were challenging. All research in anthropology comes with challenges. It's about exploring how people see the world and how they relate to one another. And the only way you can do this anthropologically, and that's why anthropology has so much to offer, and what's so interesting about it is that you're actually forging people with people. You're forging these relationships with people. You are relating to them. You have to establish some kind of trust, and working with people who were deemed irregular or illegal or considered illegal by the Moroccan state, also by kind of wider forces and authorities, was difficult. I was the white French guy coming to a former French colony, into exploring the lives of people who came from Western Central Africa. We, in many cases, also were former French colonies, and my passport allowed me to travel in and out of the country, whereas they were trying to get into Europe. So I mean, to start a relationship and to start kind of establishing relationship with people, that you're starting with a kind of difficult situation, a situation that highlights inequalities, that highlights inequalities in terms of chances, in terms of future making, in terms of how you can project yourself and what you can achieve. And they were deeply aware about this, obviously, and so was I. But despite this, you can find ways of befriending, of establishing a rapport with people, and I did. It took some time, and it was not easy, but physically, materially, my life doing field work was tricky, but it was nowhere as tricky as life was for the people I was doing research with. Sometimes it was a kind of life or death kind of situation for them, whereas for me, if something really serious happened, I mean, nothing really serious ever happened, really. I could always kind of escape it because of the privileges I had in terms of mobility. But that was what I was interested in, and I became involved politically with some of the people I was working with, got involved in political associations with them, and that's how we kind of bounded in trying to examine what was going on and trying to kind of push things a little bit and make life more bearable for people there, which is a long-term process. There's still a lot of issues there for sure, and you need a lot of changes. You need a lot of people involved in order to make things better. But yeah, that was the big difficulty there, trying to overcome this these inequalities which were already there in between us, and which we had to overcome. But I made lifelong friends. I was best man for one of my main informants' wedding in Brussels a couple of years ago. I've kept contact with lots of people. Some of them are in the States now. Some of them are in the UK, actually, in the north of England. Some people are in Brussels, France, Spain, Germany, all over. Some of them are still there, of course. Some of them have come back. Some of them I've lost touch with. But yeah, it was difficult, but it was interesting. It brought me a lot, and I'm glad I did this research project.
It's good to hear that you still have those good relationships with the people that you were able to have as informants. And in terms of forming those relationships, you talked about advocacy, and I know from research that you're part of the Mobilising Access to Rights for Artists in Morocco, kind of arts for advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think the importance of the anthropologist is in that advocating and that activist aspect? I know it's probably inspired from seeing those conditions that the privileges one has oneself, that you kind of want to contribute back. So how did that impact you?
I think it's a concern that was there from the very beginning. I was never interested in a kind of detached, kind of ivory tower anthropological style. I was interested in exploring how people kind of make sense of themselves and their place in the world, how they act on the world, how they are acted upon by wider forces. And I wanted my research to matter. I wanted the fieldwork period to matter and the relationships I was forging to matter. And as I was researching, I was active with the people I met and bounded with. I was helping out with friends who were active in NGOs. I helped setting up a migrants association in Morocco when I was there. We did stuff together. I'm still in touch with them, obviously, I have a lot of teaching here, other things to do. I'm still involved, and I've done other projects. The Art for Advocacy was one of the Maram project on kind of creative, on freedom of creation, freedom of expression, and migration. I think anthropology has a lot to contribute to in terms of critical kind of thinking skills and exploring and zooming in into wider issues and problems which other which we can't just tackle by providing kind of quantitative data about, that we can't just kind of examine from far away. I think it requires us to get close to people to understand what their lives are like. And once you forge these relationships, there's also, you're part of it, you're part of this world in some ways. And it's a matter of choice for the anthropologist to what degree you get involved. And it kind of depends on the project and the field side and relationships. But you are, whatever you choose, you are embedded in these relationships, you are embedded in that field, you're part of these processes that you're studying, which is what ethnography is about. We are involved in. We can't pretend that we are objective observers looking from outside. We are inside, we're in it. And so then it's a question of, to what extent you want to be involved and what you want to do and what you can do. And more recently, I've done more projects which were kind of focused on advocacy, and several projects that were involved doing kind of more collaborative work as well. So rather than doing my project alone, I've done collaborations with other anthropologists, with Laura Jeffrey in Edinburgh, with people from other disciplines, Angela Palladino here from Keele University. We had projects together, and we collaborated with research partners in Morocco. So NGOs, but also artists, creative practitioners. And what was really exciting about this project was about kind of finding bridges, finding ways of doing research together. So not only doing interdisciplinary research with people from kind of post-colonial studies, anthropology and other disciplines, but also working across sectors, working with NGO workers, working with artists, and finding kind of common ground, finding ways to engage together and explore issues, analyze them. And there's a lot of overlap between the arts, between anthropology and other disciplines in terms of commitment, in terms of methods, in terms of also kind of having to establish rapport with people and going close to people. So we have a lot to learn from one another, and doing work together was really exciting. Also because it was about doing projects that were not simply about writing articles at the end that fewer people will read, but also coming up with creative pieces, exhibitions, stuff for the wider public, which is what we did for Arts for Advocacy in Morocco, which was about finding kind of innovative methods for both research and advocacy about displacement in Morocco. Or Maram, which was a project that we finished very recently. And on the website, there's a couple of documentaries and the exhibition. But this was about, again, doing a collaboration with creative practitioners, with artists, in a kind of interdisciplinary setting to explore together freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of creation, working with artists, doing workshops, coming up with kind of research outputs that are not just traditional articles, but also things for the wider public. Yeah, and that's really exciting part of anthropology, is how easy in a way, how anthropology is both this, maybe anthropologists are really precious about ethnography, but it's true that the anthropological way of exploring the world is a very peculiar one. It's a really exciting, interesting, and insightful and creative one. And because it's creative, it's also something that you can easily, not always easily, I mean, it comes with difficulties too, but you can kind of attach it to and collaborate with other people in other ways of exploring the world, whether it's people from other disciplines or whether it's people who are from outside university, artists, for instance, or kind of other kind of creative practitioners. And that's been quite exciting.
Yes, you highlighted the kind of interdisciplinary aspect of the work that you've done in terms of social anthropology, and I think it's interesting to see how that contributes to forming social policy, and how working together in terms of activism brings out results that have good outcomes that can actually make a difference, which I think, and you've mentioned, is very important to you.
Yeah, it comes from my kind of background as well. I did a joint degree. I didn't do a BAS degree. I didn't exist where I was doing my undergrad, but I did a joint honors degree. So I was doing anthropology and sociology for my undergrad. Before then, for postgrad school, I went to Edinburgh University to do then an anthropology master's and anthropology PhD. But from the very start, I've always kind of seen the value of not erecting harder to reach or harder to overcome kind of disciplinary boundaries, but also to find common ground, to find ways of working together. And that's really exciting. Because we use different tools, we use different kind of uh, analytical ways of exploring the world depending on what discipline we're working in, of course. But there's overlap, there's ways to collaborate, and if we want research and teaching to make an impact on the world we're living in, especially in terms of inequalities, I'm thinking because of the module you did last year and for your BAS degree, but we need that. We need to collaborate together rather than working in our own little corner. And I think anthropologists overall are quite keen on working with other people because they have to, because that's the nature of our job. We have to forge relationships to explore the world around us. We don't work on our own. We're very much aware that we have to be embedded somewhere, that we have to relate to other people, and we know that how difficult it is, but how invaluable that can be.
Thank you very much, Sebastien. That was very enlightening for me, and I'm sure for all of the listeners. And it was a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you on this series.
Thank you. Thanks for having me too, Ben. It's great.